Welcome to Storytime, etc. We try to post scary stories every day, so please subscribe and hit the bell button to get notified. Story 1. True, my dad witnessed a ghost at his work. Okay, so my dad has always been that type of guy where he doesn't believe in anything unless he witnessed it for himself. He's a pretty macho guy and isn't into all that fairy tale and ghost nonsense. Yet that all changed for him one day. It was about 2:30 in the afternoon when my dad came home. He works the night shift at the old El Reno prison. He says it's a pretty laid-back job for the most part. He'll usually drive around the prison in one of the guard trucks or keeps watch in the towers, but one night he was sent to do a sweep of the chapel, as to make sure no one was in there who wasn't supposed to be. His boss, let's call him Jack, told him to come back and check in with him after he had done so. My dad walked through the yard out to the chapel, and as soon as he walked in he said he felt just a wave of nervousness come over him. He flicked on the old lights and walked in and began to check all around the room. After about a couple minutes he said a man, dressed in the same uniform as him, walk out from the little office in the back. My dad asked the man if he was already doing the sweep of the chapel, and the man replied, "Yes, I'll take it from here." So, confused as to why he was sent out there to check the chapel, my dad just gave a little, "Oh, okay, I'll let Jack know." My dad returned to his boss about 15 minutes after he had sent him. Jack looked at him and asked, "How did you get done so fast? You couldn't have possibly checked that whole place in such a short amount of time?" "Another guard's already in there, said he'd check it," my dad said. And I guess Jack didn't think anything of it. As long as the chapel was checked, everything was fine with him. Well, this is where it gets creepy. About 3 days after, my dad said he was walking down the halls of the prison and stopped to look at the display case of all the old photos of other guards in the past. As he was browsing the photos, he said his heart sank and his blood froze. One of the pictures he came across was that very same guard he had encountered in the chapel, only this guard was dead. Apparently about 4 years before my dad started working there, a riot had broken out in the chapel and a guard was stabbed to death, and that guard was the same man my dad has seen in the old chapel. But out of the 12 years of working there, not once had he ever heard about the riot until now. I don't know if they just don't talk about it, scared it might run off of some newbies, or if it's just something a lot of them had forgot about. All I can say is, my dad is now a firm believer in the paranormal, and not once has he ever gone back into the creepy chapel. Story 2. The Morning Visitor. I had this supervisor, Kate. One day, we had a discussion that turned into the unexplained, and she told me about something that happened when she was a teenager. She tries to debunk crazy things that have happened, but this is one she hasn't been able to do. It was the summer after she graduated from high school, sometime in the second half of the 1990s. She was 18 at the time. Her friend Billy was a few years older, but still lived with his mother in their house. This was in a small city in western Maryland, and Billy's house had just enough land that he could throw raging, day-to-night summer parties complete with bonfires. At the same time, they weren't totally isolated, and random people from the surrounding neighborhoods would show up to his parties all the time. One day, Billy met this skater kid named Nick at a park one morning, and being a social animal guy, Billy invited him to hang out with him at his house. Billy probably also took some pity on Nick, because Nick told him he was a runaway who was living at the park. They would basically play video games, go on rides, and party till late at night. Nick started showing up every day at Billy's house, knocking on the door at 7 a.m. sharp and engaging him in the morning till night drinking. He was about 16, with dark eyes and dark spiky hair. Remember, this was the late 90s, and seemed fairly normal and everything except for a couple of things. The first was that he always wore the same thing, a plain t-shirt and a pair of camo print cargo shorts. Despite the fact that he was sleeping at a park, his clothes always looked clean. The second is that he was never seen eating or going to the bathroom, despite the fact that Nick was drinking heavily with Billy. Finally, oddly enough, no one remembers actually feeling Nick's skin, even my supervisor, who had sat next to him in a car during a road trip. She hung out with Billy and Nick at Billy's house 2 times, and each time she and her friend felt like something was very off with Nick. especially when he would give off this laugh that just sounded very evil and maniacal. He also seemed to get kookier and weirder when they went on a road trip and got further away from Billy's city. Nick would also never shut up about his father's gun collection. Finally, Billy's hospitality reached its limits after 2 weeks of waking Billy up at 7 a.m. to go party. Billy snapped at Nick at his front door. He said, "Look, Nick, you've been coming here every morning for 2 weeks. You're waking up my mother, who's trying to sleep. You really need to go now. Please just come back later." Then he slammed the door shut. Nick never showed up again. Billy came to Katie, a little bit later, with a newspaper article. It was about Nick, who had apparently killed himself. Nick had escaped from the mental asylum his parents had put him in that was located in Billy's town, got to his father's house and shot himself with his father's gun. Billy was originally upset because he felt like he must have put Nick over the edge when he kicked him out, until he checked the dates. Nick had committed suicide on July 10, 2 weeks before they had met. Story 3, My Sleep Paralysis Episode. Just to start off, I am not a writer, so I'm sorry if I made any grammar mistakes or if something doesn't make sense. I know I can be a little jumpy with details sometimes. I hope you can enjoy, and please be respectful. Now I guess onto my story. I am a 19-year-old female, and at the time that all of this happened to me I was 17. So just to give some long and necessary background, I was and still dating a guy named Kyle. That's not his real name, but go with it. We shared a small group of friends. We were all pretty close to each other. We did almost everything together, especially when it involved smoking weed and doing other harder substances. They were pretty chill and trustworthy friends, or so I thought. Anyways, one day 2 weeks before my junior year started, I was hanging out with the group at one of their houses, and I just so happened to fall asleep after a while of being there. I woke up probably 5 minutes later to one of my friends touching my inner thigh. Just to note, I was the only female in the group, and my boyfriend wasn't there when this occurred. He was at show choir practice, so he couldn't have been there even if he wanted to. When the friend touching me noticed I woke up, he immediately stopped, and I ran into the bathroom crying. I've been raped and sexually assaulted before, so just going through it again isn't the greatest feeling. A few minutes passed by and I left the bathroom. I pulled one of my friends aside and told him what happened. His response shocked me. He said he saw what happened, but he didn't stop him. I don't know why he didn't, and I guess I'll never know. But that same friend told me not to tell Kyle, because he didn't want any friendships ruined. Well, I obviously told Kyle after show choir practice, and he was understandably pissed off. We've come to the agreement that we will no longer be friends with them anymore. A few days went by still avoiding the group, and we would receive a lot of messages from them, but they were shocking and hurtful messages saying, "I'm being overdramatic, that it's my fault that it happened. Just act like nothing ever happened, he didn't really sexually assault me," and so on. I was pretty destroyed reading all those messages coming from those so-called friends, but for some stupid reason, we all became friends again when school started. I know what you're thinking. Why would we go back to that shitty group of friends? I guess our only lame excuse is that we hate confrontation, and we wanted things to go back to normal. I wanted to feel normal again. Well, obviously it wasn't the best idea taking back those friends, especially the one who touched me. Because it started to really affect me mentally. I became super depressed, I developed really bad trust issues with everyone, including my boyfriend. I would constantly have panic attacks throughout the day. I started self-harming again, I was extremely suicidal, and I was failing all of my classes because I rarely showed up to school. The school attendants and staff had no idea what was wrong with me. I would refuse to tell them and my family. But one day came around and I couldn't hold it in anymore. I told my family, and at first they were supportive, but then it quickly changed. I don't really want to go into the details, but for a long time I felt so alone. Later on, around November 2017, my boyfriend did something behind my back with another girl. He didn't cheat on me, he just sold some weed to her. But for some odd reason I mentally got worse. I just didn't know how to cope with anything that has and was happening to me. I started mentally abusing my boyfriend. Like extremely bad to where he hated himself, and I think at some point he even became suicidal. Deep down it made me happy. I wanted someone to feel pain too, but it got so bad to where we broke up twice, but then got back together the same day each time. Now fast forward to around February 2018. One night that's when it had happened. I was having trouble sleeping, and it was getting late. I also had school the next morning, so I was getting pretty frustrated. Finally around 1 a.m. I started dozing off. I found myself awake probably about 10 to 15 minutes later. I noticed a tall dark figure standing across the room in my closet. At first, I thought it was my older brother messing with me because he's done stuff like this before. But as I tried to say his name, I couldn't. That's when I realized I couldn't speak, couldn't move, I was paralyzed. So as I'm staring at this figure in my closet wondering what the fuck is happening, the figure starts moving closer to me. Then I noticed it kind of looks like it was floating towards me. I can feel myself panicking, but I couldn't move or say anything. So when the tall dark figure reached the side of my bed, I kid you not, it bent over and grabbed my nose. Now I couldn't breathe through of my nose or mouth. I'm just staring at this dark figure. Its face was so close to mine, but I couldn't make out any features. I can feel my heart trying to break out of my chest. My lungs are hurting like hell because I couldn't breathe. I legitimately thought I was going to die, but suddenly I quickly sat up, gasping for air, looking around my room for that figure, but it wasn't there. I was scared. I was so scared. I didn't know what just happened. I thought I just had the most realistic nightmare of my life. I mean, I guess that's kind of what happened. The next morning when my boyfriend picked me up for school, I told him about the realistic nightmare. He said, "That's creepy," and that was that. A few weeks later I brought it up to my older brother, and that's when he told me that I actually had sleep paralysis. I had no clue what sleep paralysis is, but after hearing his definition of it and doing some research, I was really freaked out. I read online that stress, anxiety, depression, sleep problems, and some other things can cause sleep paralysis. I realized that everything that had happened to me sort of recently played a big part in my sleep paralysis episode that night. I would be lying if I said I didn't have trouble sleeping for a while after that, but I eventually got over it. But every now and then, I do get a little nervous to go to sleep. Fast forward to now, 2020. Kyle and I are doing really well. Better than ever. We are renting our own apartment. We have 2 cats, and they are absolutely amazing. Our 3-year anniversary is next month, and we are extremely excited. On another note, September 22, 2019 I was diagnosed with extreme depression and anxiety disorder, but I now go to therapy and take medications to help with that. I have never felt better and happier. Oh, and in case you were wondering, we are no longer hanging with those shit friends anymore.
Thanks for watching. Let us know your thoughts in the comments section, and please like and subscribe to help support the channel.